Have you ever heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Well, today I'm going to look at how it started, what it is, and how to use it. The word taxonomy is commonly associated with science as a term used for classification of organisms. In education, the term is associated with Benjamin Bloom as a classification scheme for educational objectives. Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchical classification system focusing on more complex aspects of learning and thinking, allowing teachers to easily write objectives and curricular units that require higher order cognitive skills and assessments that are better aligned to the standards. Benjamin Bloom was an American educational psychologist who made the improvement of student learning the central focus of his life's work. Bloom was interested in the way students thought and processed information. He recognized that learning does not happen on accident. It must be planned and well thought out. His work detangled the interdependent web of learning, teaching, identifying educational goals, and thinking. His goal was to classify patterns of thinking behaviors that impact learning. At an American Psychological Association convention in 1948, a group of educators began writing the original book, Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. The book was published 8 years later in 1956 after being contributed to by 34 educators. Only 4 are mentioned by name, in addition to Benjamin Bloom: Max Eaglehart, Edward First, Walter Hill, and David Krathwohl. The original taxonomy creates a foundation to give meaning to curriculum standard writing, provides common language among all educational levels, produces congruency in instructional units, and encourages in-depth educational possibilities. The original taxonomy is a single-dimensional hierarchy. It is known as a hierarchy because to achieve the next level in the cognitive process, the prior level must be mastered. Before a student can successfully complete a task at an application level, they need to have basic knowledge and comprehension of the concept first. The original taxonomy contains 6 main categories and 20 subcategories. The 6 main categories are as follows: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. The taxonomy levels have been compared to many analogies, such as stairs, showing that one level builds on top of the other, and gears, showing the interdependency of each level. The first 3 levels facilitate a lower order thinking, and the top 3 levels foster a higher order cognitive process. The knowledge category here is unidimensional and embodies both noun and verb aspects of the word. The verb entity is represented in the definition of what students are expected to be able to do at this level, which is recall and recognize new knowledge. The noun entity of the knowledge is represented in the subcategories of this tier: knowledge of specifics, knowledge of the way and means of dealing with specifics, and knowledge of universal abstractions in the field. Once the knowledge is obtained, a teacher uses the other tiers of the taxonomy to make the knowledge more purposeful. Bloom's original theory remained unrevised for nearly 50 years. The single dimension construction led to a few weaknesses in design. Revision to the structure and vocabulary of Bloom's taxonomy set way in 1990 under the leadership of Lauren Anderson, a former student of Bloom, and David Krathwohl, a partner in the original design. In 2001, the revision was published with the intent to be implemented by a wider audience, focusing on a more authentic tool for curriculum planning, instructional delivery, and assessments. The new revised taxonomy split the knowledge level into 2 dimensions, a noun side and a verb side. The noun side was known as the knowledge dimension, and this refers to the actual understanding of strategies. The verb side was known as the cognitive process dimension, and this refers to the use of strategies. The new knowledge dimension was created by using the subcategories from the original taxonomy, but giving them new titles. Titles such as factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge, and then a 4th new category was added, metacognitive knowledge. The new category refers to the stored information as well as the awareness of knowledge in one's cognition. This new level helps students apply knowledge obtained to new situations. Anderson and Krathwohl also switched the evaluation and synthesis level, making synthesis the highest level, which corrected some of the weaknesses in the design. The cognitive dimension preserves the original ideas that originated in the first taxonomy, but changed the noun titles to verbs. because the ability to obtain knowledge requires active learning. The knowledge level was changed to remember, comprehension became understand, application changed to apply, analysis changed to analyze, evaluation became evaluate, and synthesis became create. Now let's look at what each level means and how it's used. Here is the definition and common verbs associated with each level. Remember, this cognitive level involves the task of recalling or remembering information. Instructional objectives at this stage include verbs such as recall, list, and define. Understand is where students know what is being communicated and can make use of the material. Verbs here include illustrate and explain. During apply, students will extract the learned knowledge in order to implement and carry out procedures. Applying verbs include executing and developing. To analyze is to break materials into parts and determine how these parts relate to another. This is seen in organizing and distinguishing. When evaluating, students make judgments about the value of material and the methods for a given purpose. Instructional objectives at this stage include verbs such as dispute and checking and detecting. When students create, they combine all the pieces they've learned to create a new product. This is seen when students are asked to design or construct. Bloom's taxonomy can be used by teachers to raise the rigor through scaffolding, which generates meaningful learning. The taxonomy provides teachers with a vocabulary bank and a system for writing objectives and planning unit activities. Educational objectives are what students are expected to know by the end of a lesson or activity and used by teachers to organize their lessons, communicate the purpose of student learning, raise the level of thinking, and align assessments to skills. Activities are the tasks that help accomplish the objective. Let's look at how this math standard can be used to write objectives and activities. The objective is written by looking at the verbs in the standard. This standard reads, the student is expected to solve problems involving the lateral and total surface area of a rectangular prism, rectangular pyramid, triangular prism, and triangular pyramid by determining the area of the surface, the shape's net. The verbs here are solve and determining. Sometimes we can use the standard as the objective, as is the case here. Once the objective is established, the activities are written as scaffolded tasks that help guide students to achieving the objectives. The verbs in the activity determine the level of blooms that they can be classified as. In Activity 1, the students are given real-world objects that they have to identify as one of the geometrical shapes. The verb here is identify, which would mean that this falls into the remember cognitive level. In Activity 2, the students are finding the surface area. This, too, also falls into the remember cognitive level. In Activity 3, they are making a net of the shape's surface. And in Activity 4, they are solving for surface area. Using the verb make and solve would put both of these activities in the apply category. In Activity 5, students are designing a tiny house. The design verb would make this activity fall into the create cognitive level. As we know, teachers do not always have enough time to teach, so it is not realistic for all the units to contain all 6 levels of Bloom taxonomy. But the goal is to create as many opportunities for higher order thinking as possible. The 2 dimensions of the revised taxonomy came with the creation of the taxonomy table, which guides teachers in the process of outlining and planning instructional units and aligning assessments to objectives. The table represents both dimensions, the knowledge dimension, which runs vertically along the left side, and the cognitive process, which runs along the top. Identifying the noun in the objective or activity will dictate which vertical knowledge category the objective or activity falls into, and the verb determines the horizontal placement on the table. Let's use the same math standard to see how the taxonomy table can be used. If you remember from Activity 1, the noun here is the geometric shapes, which is the understanding of geometric terminology. So this is categorized as factual knowledge. The verb in this activity is identify. So this is the remember cognitive process. Based on these criteria, activity 1 would go in cell A1. In activity 2, where students were finding surface area, this activity would go in cell C1 because the noun is surface area, which is the skill or algorithm, so that would be in procedural knowledge. Find is the verb, therefore it would go in the remember cognitive process. In activity 3, students were making a net of each geometrical shape. The net is conceptual because it deals with the models and structures of each shape, and making, the verb, is the action of modeling, which is applying cognitive process. Based on these words, activity 3 would go in B3. In activity 4, where students are solving word problem, using the surface area formula again places this activity in the procedural knowledge domain. With a verb of solve, it falls in the applying cognitive domain. So this category goes in cell C3. In activity 5, students are designing a tiny house. The designing action puts this in the creation cognitive process. This activity is double categorized in the conceptual and procedural knowledge level because students utilize the knowledge of both the surface area equation and the knowledge of the structures. Therefore, this activity would go in cell B6 and C6. Placing activities in the taxonomy table allows teachers to see how well their lessons are scaffolded, whether or not activities are thought-provoking, and where the gaps are in the lessons. The taxonomy table can be used for planning the entire unit. You will begin by breaking down your standards into learning objectives and placing them accordingly onto the taxonomy table. You will then either write or pick out how you want to assess the students. This does not always need to be a summative assessment. These questions and activities will be placed on the taxonomy table next. Finish by placing the instructional activities in the appropriate cells. Complete alignment is evident when there are cells that include objectives, activities, and assessment items. Given our current global pandemic and the fact that today's students are 21st century learners, it is only fitting to discuss that the revised taxonomy can be used in digital learning as well. Using applications and programs can be vehicles that help students achieve each level of Bloom's taxonomy. Quizlet can help students remember content and new vocabulary. Tools such as graphs and mind maps help students make sense of content. Virtual labs can help students analyze abstract concepts. Programs such as Canva, Flipgrid, and Storyboard That give students platform to foster creativity. And communication software such as Zoom, Google Meet can help students connect all over the world so that they can defend, dispute, compare, and contrast opinions and research findings. The revised taxonomy is used in other fields of education, such as nursing and computer science programs. I know right about now, reservations are starting to set in. You may be thinking, we don't have time to do this many activities. Or not all students come with the same background information to be able to complete higher order thinking activities. Or I don't have time to spend doing this much planning. And while these reservations are valid and make it extremely difficult to execute Bloom's taxonomy, give it a try. All the standards you cover in a year do not need to contain an activity for each and every cognitive level every time. But the more we can move past the applying phase, the more meaningful learning opportunities we will create for our students. Creating activities do not need to be a week-long project. It can be something as simple as a comic strip or a mnemonic device, or anything that allows your students to make a new product from the new knowledge they've obtained. Start with your next big unit and ask yourself, am I challenging my students? Does my unit span across different knowledge dimensions and cognitive processes? Is my assessment aligned with the types of activities used to teach the concepts? Let's create meaningful learning opportunities that will lead to lifelong learners.